accusing Israel of committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Israel denies all the allegations.
Well, last week, John Kirby, a spokesperson for the US National Security Council, called the lawsuit meritless, counterproductive and completely without any basis in fact whatsoever.
Well, since Hamas's 7th of October attack on Israel, where at least 1,300 people were killed and 240 people were taken hostage, the Hamas-run health ministry has reported that 23,500 people have been killed in the war in Gaza.
Well, let's talk to the political editor at GBNews, Lee Harpin, who's here in the studio. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it right that this is at least looked at within a court of law?
I think the big problem for Israel is there's no doubt that Hamas, with that horrendous attack on October the 7th, committed what I think any sensible voice in the entire globe would say was a genocidal act of terrorism. But the question is, how do you respond to genocide? And the problem for Israel, I think, is that you can respond to a genocidal act by committing genocide yourself, or it could be argued you could. Now, in Israel's defence, when we look at Hamas is a terror organisation. It embeds itself within civilian populations, within civil society. How do you fight back against Hamas without causing civilian death, without causing loss of life?
Because so it's the argument, is it, that the loss of civilian life is tragic in Gaza. There's no other way of looking at it. However, there is then that argument to say, well, what is Israel meant to do? Is it just meant to let Hamas regroup and try again?
I mean, I think that argument is very strong. I mean, how does Israel fight back against Hamas? Do all wars cost civilian lives? They do. Is it horrendous? Do all of us, feel absolutely sick when we see images of women and children, as we have done on the screens? But how does Israel fight back? How does Israel target Hamas? Some say, targeted killings, but the truth is the Hamas leadership is embedded in tunnels under Gaza. We've seen the tunnels exposed by Israel repeatedly. So many would argue that Hamas itself is committing war crimes, is committing genocide itself by embedding itself. Lots of Hamas fighters, they don't wear soldiers' uniforms, they wear civilian clothes. So it's an impossible situation almost for Israel. And there's no doubt Israel does need to fight back against Hamas because, what would we do here in this country were missiles constantly flying in? Would we just sit back and say, well, we can't fight that force because we might kill some innocent people? Unfortunately, this is the devastating consequence of a horrendous conflict.
It is an impossible situation. Do you think that there can ever be a successful military operation in the sense of what you're talking about there, where Hamas are not wearing army uniforms? I mean, they are embedded in the civilian population. We're talking about an ideology here. Do you think there can be a successful military operation, or do you think this needs to be a political?
Personally, I don't think the situation can ever be solved through a military action, but Hamas's ability to fight back and fire missiles into Israel, where lots of Jewish people, myself included, have family, so we sit there worrying on a daily basis. It can be diminished, and I think current estimates. I sat in with the Foreign Secretary David Cameron just the other day in Westminster when he was answering questions, and I think the estimate so far is that 50% of Hamas's military forces have been killed off in the current wave. So there is signs that the military action is working in some way for Israel, but there's still a long way to go. And obviously, what nobody wants to see is more deaths, is more loss of life, innocent lives, and the possibility that some of these people, their families, as a result of this action, are being radicalised and turned into the new wave of Hamas terrorists themselves, which is.
That's the horrific irony of it all, isn't it? But within all of this, I mean, what's your assessment of what we're seeing globally, but also here in the UK? Because the one thing that bizarrely gets brushed under the carpet is a massacre, the horrific massacre of 1,300 innocent Jewish civilians in a deliberate act of terrorism. And as you say, possibly you could view it as some sort of a genocidal attack. You know, when you look at public opinion, or at least what you see on the streets and, and the rise in anti-Semitic attacks and all the rest of it, why is it that we have seen this situation turn 180 against the initial victims of this dreadful attack?
I know. I think to many people in Israel and to many Jews in this country, Israel repeatedly seems to be held to higher standards than many other countries in the world. And we saw this October the 7th happened. By October the 8th, there were demonstrations on the streets, not just in this country, but across the world. Not demonstrations in solidarity with the Jewish people, in solidarity with Israel, but demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And there is this view, and you know, there's definitely something to it. I think that the world is very quick to write off or to briefly acknowledge the suffering of the Israeli people, but then the Palestinian people's suffering, which there is, takes on far greater significance. And I do think, unfortunately, and I don't think this is, you know, for most people the case, there is an anti-Semitic element to some of that. There is this belief amongst some people that, you know, the Jews, the powerful Jews, oh, well, let's not worry about them so much, yes, and they go on about the Holocaust all of the time. But here they are, you know, carrying out what, you know, I would wrongly, and, you know, it's very sickening to hear it, carrying out a Holocaust of their own, which is just not the case. It's just not the case. But there is that horrendous sentiment here and across the globe that it needs to be challenged, and we need education to challenge it. Yeah. And anyone who's been to Israel, as I have repeatedly, would know Israel itself, and I'm talking about Israel within the Green Lines, is a democratic state. 20% of its population are Muslim, and I think the most recent poll, which I read only last week, showed that 70% of them were happy and satisfied with their lives inside Israel. So it says much for, you know, the type of state that Israel is. And that's not, I'm not talking about what goes on in the West Bank, and I'm not talking about what's going on in Gaza now. And there are very unfortunate comments being made by members of the current Israeli government calling for, you know, the sweeping out, the clearing of Gaza, and that doesn't help Israel's case at all. It really doesn't. But that is not the Israel that most of us love and know.
Okay, Lee Harpin, really good to see you this morning.
Thank you for having me on.